Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the live stream. Getting a little bit of feedback. Okay, that's fine now. I hope everyone is very well tonight. So we have Richard here from Rejoin EU. Richard is going to be with us for maybe about an hour and a half. We're going to answer some questions. He's going to answer some questions. I'm going to answer some questions too. We're both pro-European, but I think there may be some things we'll agree on and disagree on. So I hope everyone is ready for the live stream here with Richard tonight. Thanks very much for coming on, Richard. It's a pleasure. I've been talking to you a little bit before. And of course, our super chats, will read them out as many as we can. And we'll, of course, read us some pre-prepared questions as well. So, Richard, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and a bit about the party and the channel? Thanks very much. We have a super chat from Valerio. I'll read that out. It says here, do you see any increase in support in rejoining the EU, or people are still confused about it? I ask because I don't see a real debate in the mass media. So, Richard, do you want to
If you think it was wrong to leave, then why don't you think the simplest solution of simply trying to get our membership back isn't one worth pursuing? So, yes, I totally agree with the sentiment of that question. And I think there is an awful lot of confusion. And that's, again, one of the reasons why we're here, because we want to make sure these questions keep getting asked.
Okay, Richard, I just received a notification that there was a problem with the sound. We weren't able to hear you very well. So hopefully it has been resolved. Sorry about that. Let me see. Just check.
I do apologize.
No, it could be a problem.
Would you like
maybe you can just... Yeah, now it's okay. Apologies for that.
Okay, so sorry. Should we do that question again?
Yeah, maybe yes, because I think I could hear you, but the other people couldn't. So we'll just go with that.
Okay, again. I do apologise. Do you want to repeat the question and I'll answer again?
So do you see an increasing support for rejoining the EU, or people are still confused about it? I ask because I don't see any real debate in the mass media. So you were mainly talking there about the media, yes.
Absolutely. So I started by talking about the end of the question, and I absolutely agree with the questioner. There is no debate in the media. And one of the things I cited was the current by-election, where candidates are talking in depth about the problems that farmers in North Shropshire are making without ever mentioning the word Brexit or the words EU in the answer. So yes, there's a lot of determination in the media, it seems, to just sort of ignore the issue. In terms of the increase in support, what we've seen recently in polls is we've seen several polls showing a majority of people regret leaving the EU, wish they hadn't voted for Brexit if they did, but think Brexit was a mistake in retrospect. But we also see a majority saying they don't think we should rejoin at the moment, which of course is a bit of an odd thing. So the majority think it's a mistake, but the majority also don't want to undo that particular mistake, which kind of leaves us in an odd position. So I just concluded my response by saying that's why we're here, to try to make sure that this issue doesn't just get off the EU agenda, that it is raised constantly in election after election.
Very good. Yeah. The point that you raised before about how in Shropshire, for example, the one candidate was able to talk about all of the problems under the sun, but not mention the B word. And we've seen over the year how the BBC itself has avoided the B word, the Brexit word, for so long, and now they're talking about it, but it is a little bit late in the day. Okay, thanks so much for that super chat, Valerio. So hopefully the audio and everything seems to be working now. We'll go on to our next super chat. This is from Hedgehog Legs. Thanks so much for that super chat as well. Boris promised to pay the late fee. Looks like I'm paying it. I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Pay the late fee?
Yeah, I'm not sure what that was about. Okay. We'll move on. We'll jump to some of the questions that we received before the stream. This is from Big Mash, who says, "Why do the EU hate England?" So I'm not sure about the EU hating England. Do you want to feel that one, Richard? Then I can chime in.
Yes, I don't think that the EU hate England, but having said that, we've not exactly conducted ourselves in a way to win hearts and minds in terms of all the rhetoric that's gone on and it has become a very toxic and poisonous debate within the UK. And I have to say, I think if I was in the perspective of looking from the outside, you'd be like that sort of person at the door when you hear people inside the door arguing about whether you're a valid person or not. And obviously, some of the things said have been quite offensive. And I hope that people in the EU don't hate England per se, because I think there are a lot of us who would like to rejoin the club in England and the United Kingdom as a whole. And also, when you are passing judgments over how England is and how England is, do bear in mind that there's not a single person in England under the age of 23 that had any say in what's happened whatsoever. They were excluded from the referendum by being too young. They've been excluded from any input into the decision since then. And most of the young people I spoke to in by-elections really love Europe, and I hope that will be reciprocated in time.
Yeah, and as how many benefits have they lost? For example, freedom of movement, or even just the Erasmus scheme, which has been taken away. It's the idea of the EU hates England. No, I don't. I think there's disappointment maybe within certain states about what's happened and how the likes of the Express or the Daily Mail has convinced people that Europe is the enemy. But
yes.
And of course there are old rivalries, maybe with the French or with the Germans, but I don't see as the European Union as a whole thinking of Britain in some negative way. We have another super chat. Thanks so much, Peter, Mr. Peter KJ. He says the EU will have their say about the EU rejoining. Sorry, I think maybe the UK rejoining. And by say I mean say no. So the EU will have their say about the UK rejoining, I imagine that is. And he believes that the EU would say no. What do you think about that? Do you think there are problems with rejoining?
Oh, of course. I mean, we've got a very, very difficult path ahead to get our membership of the European Union back. And I think none of us actually know what the response is going to be. Let's be clear what the only possible roadmap is. I'm arguing that next time we have a general election in the UK, what we need to do is send back a majority of MPs to Parliament who are willing to trigger the Article 49 process. Because until we actually start the discussions, we can't possibly know what the attitude is going to be of the great and the good within the European Union. We can't know what the attitude of the other 27 is going to be to that particular prospect, and we can't know what's going to be on offer in order to put to the British public in terms of a rejoining referendum. But you're absolutely right. It may well be that there are going to be obstacles to the UK rejoining. Let's look at it the other way, though. If you were the EU and you were looking at it from a purely cynical point of view, what would be the better statement of the success of the European Union, of them one errant member who left the fold, seeing the error of their ways and trying to return to the fold? And I think even if you're a cynical, hard-nosed politician looking to extract benefits from the UK's return, that's going to be a little bit irresistible. But let's be honest, we're all just prognosticating until we actually see the Article 49 process and what's actually going to be on offer.
Would you see more problems on the UK side than on the EU side?
Not necessarily, no. I mean, I think it will probably have to have another referendum to actually go through. I think another referendum would be successful in terms of establishing our willingness to be part of the EU. To a large extent, I hear a lot of red herrings thrown at us in terms of, you'll have to sign up to Schengen, you'll have to be part of the euro. Well, although those are statements in the agreements within the EU law, they're all subject to negotiation during the Article 49 process. Me, personally, I'd love to be part of the euro. I'd love to be within the Schengen system. Other people may disagree on that. I doubt very much it's going to be a deal breaker if it comes to a vote in the UK. So my prediction from the UK side would be, if Article 49 negotiations are opened, a deal will be brought back, it will be subject to a referendum, and I think it will be a referendum that passes a mandate to rejoin the EU.
Guys, so just those who have maybe joined late, welcome to the live stream. I'm here with Richard from Rejoin EU, and we're discussing the possibility of the UK rejoining the European Union at some stage in the future, as soon as possible, I would like to see. So we'll move on to our another question. We have a question from Riel, who says, do you think that there's a hope in hell that enough people will have a broad enough vision to temporarily get over the differences, he says, for example, between the SNP and Labour, to just get the bloody Tories out? So it's not so much maybe a European question, but more a get the Tories out question. So can maybe if we look at the next election, do you see Labour, the SNP, other parties working together, or do you still think there are going to be problems to get people united?
No, sadly, I don't. And I feel so frustrated that it's not happening. But we had the disaster of the 2019 election because, and I don't want to be too personal here, but we had two intransigent individuals in the form of Jeremy Corbyn and Jo Swinson who would not cooperate with each other in a parliament which they could have controlled between them, where they could have advanced things. And the 2019 election was a disaster that we should have learned from. We now have two more intransigent individuals in the form of Ed Davey and Keir Starmer, who I do not see budging and who I can see quite easily sleepwalking into electoral disaster again in the next general election. Now, the one thing which I think surprises all of us is how the Conservatives are holding up in the opinion polls. Now, you might say, well, come on, they've been dropping in the opinion polls. They're in the mid-30s. When you consider what this government has done since the election, how, in goodness sake, are they still in the mid-30s? There is not one single disaster that could have gone worse for this government so far, and yet still, in the opinion polls, they are in a position to be at least able to avoid giving up the keys to Downing Street, even if it's not going to guarantee them an election. Now, there is absolutely no doubt that a progressive alliance, as it's called, between the opposition parties could be successful in the next general election. And what's more, it's about the only hope, I would suggest, that the opposition parties have of successfully getting the Tories. But will they do it? I think my current observations of where the parties are at the moment indicates that the propensity for stupidity is much higher on the opposition parties than it really should be at this stage in the parliament.
What about the SNP? The SNP would be willing, well, would want to extract certain conditions if they were to join the Labour Party in a maybe in an electoral pact or at least in government. So what sort of do you see that going down well or?
Well, the interesting thing with the mathematics, if you look at all the models based on even the most optimistic polls for Labour, a few weeks ago where Labour managed to get about 2 or 3% ahead, it showed them on 303 seats, and only the SNP would have been able to keep them in power in that particular case. So, to be quite frank, I don't see the SNP losing many of their seats in Parliament. They're going to come back with another 50 odd seats in the next election. Almost certainly, if Labour perform at their absolute best, that means that they will just be in a position to accept governance with SNP support. And I don't think Nicola Sturgeon will want to keep Boris Johnson in Downing Street. I do not think that will happen. I think if she has the option to boot him out, she will. That doesn't mean she has to cooperate with Labour. It just basically means she can let them operate on a minority basis. It doesn't have to go into coalition. It doesn't even have to do a formal supply and confidence arrangement if she doesn't want to. The SNP can just sit on their hands and let Labour's 303 seats beat the Tories' 260 seats in Parliament. I have to say, I think what you'll probably find the most likely scenario will be a weak Labour minority government, which at least isn't the Tories, and the only things they will get through will be things that are unassailably in the public interest, such as, for example, cleaning up sleaze, standards in public life, that sort of thing. But in terms of things like proportional representation, get it.
Okay, thanks for that. Thanks for that response, Martha and Dotchi. We have a super chat from her. Thanks so much, Martha. Certain countries stand to win a lot more political influence, and having the UK back might actually be a hindrance to them. So, could the UK, by the fact that the UK is no longer a member, has this strengthened unity within Europe, or do you think, in this sense, that many countries would be happy to keep Britain out?
There seems to be two questions there. In terms of unity between the current 27, it does seem much stronger than it's ever been. I mean, obviously, we have the badly behaved members of the club, your Polands and your Hungary, but even they seem to have been chastened somewhat by observing the awful things that's happened to the UK since it's left the EU. And I think that is certainly forcing people together. In terms of, I'm wondering if the question's very politely saying, now that the UK is gone, are there people enjoying their position of influence that wouldn't want to see the UK back? I doubt it very much, to be honest, because the UK was always a bit of an awkward member. Well, no, that's not fair. Recently was certainly the awkward member in the club, and I don't really see that there's any country that particularly wants to have status as the awkward member of the club. It certainly didn't make me feel very good about my country or my politicians observing some of the posturing while we were in the EU, and I can't imagine many politicians seeing that as an advantage for their particular country.
There is a follow-up question I wanted to ask, but I think it's already in our list and we will cover it, so I'll move ahead. The next question is from Chris, who says, doesn't create a single issue party risk fracturing the Remain vote? With an end result that keeps the Tories in power. So I think this is a question that many people will probably have on their mind. You know, you're setting up the Rejoin EU party. Are you creating problems for the Remain voters who maybe they would say, look, let's vote for Labour, let's vote for Lib Dems? What do you think about that?
Good question. I'll give my answer briefly. No, and then I'll explain why. First of all, Labour, from what I can see of the current strategy, would very, very much like to take Remainers for granted. We've heard this awful rhetoric coming out of Labour under this three-word slogan, make Brexit work. And we know what that slogan means. It's a dog whistle. It's a dog whistle so that if you voted Brexit, because of basically xenophobic reasons, they're saying we're on your side. You know, we're on your side. We see what's happening with people trying to get into the country. We're secretly on your side. Whereas if you're a Remainer, the dog whistle is, oh, we're not going to say it, but we want to rejoin the single market. We want to rejoin the customs union. This is on the agenda. It's not. Make Brexit work basically means that they take Remainers for mugs, that we will vote for Labour thinking, oh, something's going to happen if we vote for Labour, and then turn around later on and say, well, it wasn't in the manifesto. We never said this was going to happen. And that's why we exist in this election. The Lib Dems, of course, have a rather different policy. The Lib Dems have a policy of wanting to be back in the EU in the long term, but not campaigning for it. And of course, the leader of their party has said, we're not a rejoin party. Personally, I find both of those attitudes disappointing, because there's nothing I would love more than to say, you know what, this party is for rejoining the EU. If I put my vote to this party, I know they're going to start the march back to rejoining the EU, but that is just not the case from what the parties are currently saying. Now, I suspect part of the question was mathematical rather than just philosophical, so I'll address the mathematical part as well. The number of votes that we are going to get in the election is not going to be enough to move any but the most marginal constituencies. We will be getting hundreds of votes, and those votes will be coming from people who want to make the point that rejoining the EU is important and they're not willing to be taken for granted by the other parties. Now, every election model we've seen, that would only make a difference in at most 10 to 15 of the most marginal constituencies. Now, I'm hoping that when it comes to the election, I'm hoping the opposition parties would have done a little bit more work on trying to work collectively together. And so whilst we will stand to make our point, almost certainly we're not going to be standing in any of those constituencies where the number of our votes would make a difference. To give you an example, we just had the Bexley and Sidcup by-election. We got 151 votes in there, which is pretty much it's a Leave area rather than a Remain area. So we weren't expecting to get huge amounts of votes. We got 151 votes. The majority was 4,000. So not one single person in that constituency made a mathematical difference with their vote. All they did was make a moral difference with their vote in terms as to where they chose to put their moral authority behind.
Okay, no, I think that's a very good answer, because I think it is a real concern that your party could be splitting the vote, and it could be, in a sense, helping the Tories. And if you're fielding candidates in constituencies where you want to send a message more than challenge the Labour Party or the Conservative or the Lib Dems for the Remain vote, I think yes, I think this is the correct approach.
Thank you, Matt. Can I just add to that as well? People always assume that if we stand in the election, every vote for us is a vote that would have gone to, say, the Liberal Democrats or Labour or the Greens otherwise. That's not the case. Many of the people who vote for us are people who previously would have voted Tory. There's a lot of old Conservatives. And let's be honest, I think we should be careful when we talk about Conservatives, talk about the old Conservatives and the new Conservatives. If you go back about 10 years in time, the old Conservatives, I might have disagreed with them on political philosophy, but they were pro-Europe, pro-human rights, pro-immigration. They were decent people who saw our future as part of the world. A lot of these people have nowhere to go. So these are people that would have voted Conservative, would otherwise have stayed at home and not do anything, and we give them a channel to actually be able to use that. And just to sort of add to that, if you want to see where our votes come from, if you have a little look at the Mayor of London election where I stood, there were 19 other candidates, and it showed exactly which of the other candidates' supporters voted for me second. And I'll be frank with you, it's a completely mad selection. For example, there's some people who voted for me first and UKIP second. I mean, why you would do that? But there was 1,000 people in that category. Bizarre.
No, that's really interesting, especially the UKIP and Rejoin EU party after. So a lot of these questions are going to be quite similar, but I think we can get through them anyway. The next question was from Regan Elite, who says, "What is the plan for the party in when the next general election is called?" So with the by-elections, it's one thing. For the general election, well, we don't have a date yet, of course. Do you want to make any mini predictions? Because I'm thinking maybe next year or 2023. Definitely, sometime before. But with Boris Johnson needs to call it. I think Boris Johnson needs to call it as soon as possible, because the longer he waits, the worse it's going to get. What do you think?
I think you are totally right there. There are a lot of signs that potentially an election as early as next spring could be possible. Those signs include things like the budget, where one thing I oddly do agree with the Conservative Chancellor on is that the economy is a mess. We now have borrowing greater than GDP, meaning that every single penny was used, every single penny everyone earns in a year was used. We still couldn't pay off the national debt. We've never been in that, or not been in that situation since World War II. The economy is a very, very dangerous pyramid scheme at the moment, in my view. And I actually wonder, the cynic in me wonders if this is what's behind everything, because maybe the Tories would kind of quite like to lose the next election so that they don't have the responsibility. But Labour are thinking, no, we don't want that either. So you've almost got this inverse chicken going as a result. But I think you're right, an early election is likely. But the other question is, will we still have Boris Johnson as leader of the Conservative Party? Now, unfortunately, I think the Tories winning in Bexley last week has probably made him safe. North Shropshire is going to be embarrassing, but they knew that anyway. If there had been 2 embarrassments in a row, that might have been too much. I think he's probably going to squeak to be home and dry at the moment. And many people still see him as an electoral asset. So it may well be that he calls an early election in the spring next year, off the back of still being where they are in the opinion polls, and then going into the deep blue sun at a later stage.
What about the Rejoin EU party? What's your plan for the general?
Oh, yes. Good. I'm sorry, I waffled a bit there and I forgot the original question. Yes, what are we going to do? Well, obviously, what we're going to do is going to depend on what the opinion polls are going into the general election. And one of the things that people sometimes are not aware of is that you cannot, by law, withdraw once you've entered an election. So once nominations are closed, you cannot withdraw from an election. So we have to make a judgment in the period up to the close of nominations where we could stand and where we could do the most good. I would hope that in the next election, if we have a reasonable lead in time in the next election, I'm hoping that what we're going to do is our potential candidates are going to be contacting the PPCs in Labour, Lib Dems and Greens and trying to get a response on what they're going to do to try and promote membership of the European Union. I would absolutely love it if, in my constituency, which is Barnet, I would absolutely love it if I could just say, you know what, I've spoken to the Labour candidate, she's behind activating Article 49. She's very pro-EU. The party as a whole may not be, but this is a candidate I can get behind and support, and then stand down in that election. But obviously, if we do get the same intransigence from Labour and the Lib Dems going into the campaign in terms of where they're going to go, then we'll need to consider where we can stand. It's also worth saying that we don't have the money to run a lot of candidates. So it's Rejoin EU is ultimately a label that anyone can use if they want to stand in an election because they feel their voice is not being heard and they want to promote rejoining the European Union. So that is basically what we're not a party where from the top down we say, right, you're going to be the candidate here, you're going to be the candidate there. It's all a product of individuals and how individuals feel they can best raise the issue of the European Union. So I honestly don't know whether we'll have 10 candidates, 50 candidates, 100 candidates in the next election. It all depends on who's interested in standing. And of course, every candidate has to come with their own £500 deposit, which of course is a bit of a barrier for many people getting involved in election.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Let's move on to the next question. We have one from... Guys, you can also send us a super chat. We'll read out the question on the stream tonight as well. We have a question from Eric, who says, and this is for both of us, has Labour proven unfit to lead to rejoining? So before I let Richard answer, maybe I'll just give a comment myself. So I think, yes, in a sense, I always look at Keir Starmer and the same way I looked at Jeremy Corbyn before that, and I try to imagine, maybe they're playing a game that I can't understand. Maybe they're playing 4D chess or something, where they're Machiavellian and I'm just some observer on the outside. But when I think about, okay, and what Richard was saying before about how the Labour Party take Remainers for granted or Rejoiners for granted, and instead they're chasing the Brexiteer vote, the people who voted for Brexit but then switched to the Tories. They want to win these people back, and I think there is there's a certain truth to that Starmer feels that, look, I don't need to engage with Remainers. I can just because they have nowhere else to go to. If it's either us or the Lib Dems, and we need to win back the Brexiteers. But I think the strategy, I don't know if it's a good idea, because a lot of people voted for Boris Johnson not just because of Brexit, but I think also because they liked Boris Johnson. They liked rebelling against what their family tradition had originally voted. So, people who had grandfather, father, grandmother, whatever, they all voted for many generations. They voted for the Labour Party, and they saw it as a way of rebelling. And I think it's difficult to win those people back by saying we're going to fix Brexit, or we're going to make Brexit work. I don't know if it's a winning strategy. I think Labour needs to present a vision. Part of that can be rejoining the European Union, but they need a bigger vision of something, because what do the Tories represent at the moment? Well, they represent Brexit. So you either have to represent the opposite of that, rejoining, or you need to represent something else. What do you think, Richard? Do you see Labour, are they unfit to lead on rejoining?
Well, I'll start that question briefly. I totally agree with everything that you said there in terms of lack of a vision. And indeed, we had a little chat beforehand talking about what Keir Starmer's up to. And I'll be frank, if you stopped me in the street and said, what is Keir Starmer's big idea? I couldn't tell you. I honestly have no idea what motivates Keir Starmer, what he's in favour of doing, why he's there. I don't even get why he wants to be leader of the Labour Party, because he doesn't seem to be doing anything apart from just trying to put a little bit of better spin and sort of out-Tory the Tories in a certain way in terms of what he's doing. And certainly it's not a vision that I think many people can buy into. Going back to the actual question, though, is Labour unfit to lead? I think you have to distinguish Labour from its current leadership and its current leadership team. I think there are many, many decent people within the Labour Party. I mean, full disclosure, perhaps I should have said this earlier on, I myself was once in the Labour Party. I then left the Labour Party and joined the Lib Dems. I then left the Lib Dems and joined the Greens. I then left the Greens and rejoined the Labour Party. I then left the Labour Party and joined this party here. So I do think there are decent people within all three of the opposition parties. It's just that their voices are not really being heard. Their voices are silenced. Perhaps if we look at the PR argument, for example, we saw in the conference that Labour just had, the vast majority of people were in favour of PR and wanted PR as Labour Party policy. The leadership, together with some of the unions, managed to completely torpedo that, which is one of the main reasons why many, many people are involved with the Labour movement, because they want to see a fairer democracy as well as a fairer society. So is Keir Starmer fit to lead the way back to the EU? Probably not, unless he has a dramatic turn on the road to Damascus. I always hope, as you say, Max, that one day he's going to reveal what his Machiavellian plan was and then turn around and wow us all. But I'll be honest with you, I thought that of Jeremy Corbyn. I thought after the 2017 election, when Jeremy Corbyn was almost there, but not quite, he's got a master plan, he's going to surprise us all, he's really going to seize the agenda. And of course, he didn't. And I doubt whether Keir Starmer will as well. But the point I'd make is there are plenty of decent, talented, charismatic people with vision within the Labour Party, within the Liberal Democrat Party, and within the Green Party. I'm going to park the Green Party on one side, but I would say both Labour and the Liberal Democrats have got a duffer as a leader at the moment. And when that dead wood is cleared away, then perhaps we can see something more useful in terms of leading the way back. But I have to say, I do also believe that the opposition parties really don't think they're going to win the next election. That's the impression I get. They really don't think they're going to win the next election. at the
No,
moment,
yeah,
and
no, I
that's why.
agree. I heard somewhere that Keir Starmer is focusing on the next one, not this one. So
Yeah,
the next one, as in the one after this one, he's not really planning to. But
yeah.
that's not
No, and
exactly.
he thinks he's going to have a second chance, which of course worked out very well for Neil Kinnock and worked out very well for Jeremy Corbyn. But I think Keir Starmer sees himself as a one more push person. But the point I would say is, if he doesn't have
Oh, can you hear me, guys? We have a technical problem. No. What the heck? Oh no, we have a technical problem. Let me see if I can fix it. Apologies. I'm not sure what's happened today. Bear with me, guys. I'm not sure what happened. Let me see if I can bring Richard back up. Okay, I'm having some. Let me see if I can. Oh my goodness. Okay. Richard.
Oh, you can see us talking to each other. Excellent. So. No problem. Was that my end or your end? Right. Okie dokie. Yes. I do apologise for that. Obviously, I normally fake the link when there's a really awkward question come my way, but that's that one gone for the evening. There, so. Okay, good. Sorry about that. Mm. Well, he's clearly capable of sabotaging webcasts that talk ill of him. So who knows? That is a really interesting question, and I'll answer that question hot-footing it from the constituency of Bexley, where I was recently campaigning in, which was a 62% Leave constituency. So I spoke to a lot of Leavers there. And I think the thing with Leavers is not to consider them a homogenous group. There are some really unpleasant characters. Yes, that's true. I remember one lady I passed on the street. She asked me what I'd do about the immigration problem and how I would treat immigrants. And I responded to her that, well, I'd make sure they were fed, housed, and given warm accommodation until their case was heard. And she walked down the street screaming expletives, F words, and C words in my direction in front of a large group of people. So there is that extreme, but that is an extreme. Most of the people who voted Leave are not extremists, and broadly they fall into two categories. Those who were taken in by the arguments at the time. I did talk to one woman who was in tears, not in this election, but a while back, because she'd voted thinking she was going to give more money to the NHS and feels really, really conned as a result of it. And she says that if she had the chance again, she would definitely vote to remain. And those, of course, are people that we need to make sure that we engage with and get on board. But I have also talked to quite a lot of Leavers who are not rude people, but they're happy with their decision. And the one thing I would say about the engagements I had with them was at the end of the conversation, when I said to them, even if you still think Brexit could have worked, you can't possibly be happy with how things are going at the moment. And you must agree with me that something needs to be done about the situation. And virtually 100% of people would nod in agreement to that statement. Doesn't mean they agree with me that we need to rejoin the EU. Doesn't mean they even agree that we need to get back our freedom of movement or rejoin the customs union. But it does mean that they agree that the Brexit situation is being appallingly mismanaged and something needs to be done about it. And this is why I honestly do not understand why, you mentioned earlier on, Max, the fact that the BBC don't like to use the B word. Neither do many of the opposition parties, particularly the Liberal Democrats and the Greens. They don't like to use the B word. I do not understand this. Even if you're not in favour of rejoining the EU, surely you must be appalled by the economic consequences of Brexit, even if you're not that moved by the social consequences.
No, I agree. Like we can sort of understand the Labour. Well, not really understand, but we can understand the tactics the Labour Party are using by avoiding talking about Brexit. But the Lib Dems and the Greens have no excuse not to be criticising Brexit and to be calling it out on a daily basis. Really don't understand why they're not doing that.
I'd had a conversation with the Lib Dem during the current election, and I said, well, why are you not doing that? And he said, well, that's because we're in the business of winning. They're on 9% in the opinion polls. Next year will be 100 years since there was last a Liberal Prime Minister in this country. That is not winning. That is not success. If you are 8%, 9% in the opinion polls with the strategy you've got, why not try something different? Who would the Liberal Democrats possibly lose by saying, you know what, we want to improve our ties with the EU. If you elect us, we're going to do things to sort out Brexit. We're going to start looking at rejoining the customs union. We're going to start looking at the single market. Why would they be so afraid to say that? I can't see they would lose any votes, and they've got the whole Remain community that they could gain support from.
Thanks for that answer, Richard. Just for those who are just joining the stream, I'm here with Richard from Rejoin EU. His party is running in North Shropshire. When is the by-election, Richard?
Thursday week, so 9 days' time. Our candidate, Boris Bean Bund, Boris Johnson impersonator, who is going to put it himself, he's in North Shropshire for all the sleaze, every bit of sleaze, and also to highlight the problems of Brexit.
Very good. I'd just like to ask a follow-up question to Tonton's, which was, how do you suggest to interact with Leavers? What if you have an uncle or a cousin or your brother or sister who's a Brexiteer? How do you engage with somebody like that?
Very difficult. I mean, I think we all probably have split families. I know when I was citing the other day that with my father's side of my family, where we go out in a group, there's 4 Leavers and 4 Remainers in that particular group. So you do often have problems. But one thing I do take great delight in, my family used to love Wetherspoons, but I refuse to set foot in Wetherspoons now. So anytime we're on a family outing, all 8 of us can't go into Wetherspoons because I won't go into Wetherspoons. And as far as I'm concerned, not only have I taken 4 Remainers away from Wetherspoons, I've taken 4 Leavers away from Wetherspoons as well, which makes me feel very, very good about it. But yes, it is hard. And I'll be honest with you, there are some friends and there are some fairly distant family members who I can't talk to now because of their attitude towards Brexit. And let's be honest, you might say, isn't Brexit just a political thing? Well, we know what a lot of the forces behind Brexit were. A lot of Brexit was predicated on all almost open xenophobia, hatred of people that are not like ourselves. I can't relate to people who come from that angle, and any Brexiteers who do come from that angle, I will just disengage with, I'm afraid.
No, and I've said a number of times on the channel that there are two groups of people. There are those who voted and then realized it was a mistake, and those people need to be welcomed back into the fray. And then there are the others, the Brexiteers, as I call them, the ones who continue to look at the evidence and say, no, I'm ignoring the evidence because I have decided this is my position. And I think some of them are maybe a little bit too far gone.
Yes.
And then we also have the politicians who cynically understand that these groups of people still exist. Look, a question I have, and maybe you can answer this, or maybe you can't, I'm not sure. People like John Redwood, does he really believe the things he says about Brexit? Or Daniel Hannan, do they really believe those things? Or
you are asking a serious question, so I won't give a frivolous answer. I do think that collectively there is something wrong with, and I don't want to over-dramatize this, but the state of British political mental health in general. I think there's something wrong there. I think things have been problematic. I suspect that what the shock jocks said previously to try and get attention about 10 years ago has now become mainstream thought. And as a result, you get let's be honest, a lot of people's political views, particularly backbench Tory MPs, they just say what they need to say to get elected. They don't really care too much. If they think what they're saying is going to win more votes than lose, then they will say it. But what I would say, if you were to take a taped summary of where we are in 2021 and magically pass it through time, back 10 years to 2011, and show it to reasonable people, they would just think it's the bizarre creation of some sci-fi nerd thinking about the stupidest possible things that could happen. This is not a place that we should have ended up with, starting where we were in 2011.
Yeah. And I said on a number of occasions how I think the highest point, the apex of British culture probably, or being British, was the 2012 Olympics. A wonderful moment. Okay, let's move on. We have a question, a super chat from DC, who says, do you think that there's any chance that we can rejoin the EU in the next 5 to 10 years? What do you think, Richard?
The next 5 to 10 years. Let's imagine Boris Johnson called a snap election in May next year, which is probably the earliest possible. For us to rejoin the EU, we would need to make sure that the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrat Party were offering a roadmap to be able to do so. And it's also worth remembering, just because you activate Article 49 doesn't mean you're rejoining the EU. It's like one of these sort of, what do you call them, this sort of no obligation free quotes that a double glazing salesman would give you. Not sure that's the greatest example of everything, but it's basically opening the process and saying, come and give us a quote. Tell us what you can do for us. But the earliest path to rejoining would be to start that particular process. If that were to happen as the result of a general election in May 22, then certainly we could be well engaged in that process within the 5 to 10 year horizon that the questioner actually raises there. And of course, there have been a lot of harsh words said between both the UK and the EU in terms of negotiations in the past, but it's not like we're dealing with complete strangers. There was a very, very stable framework that we used to be part of, which would be relatively straightforward to go back to. So what I would say is, if there is the will in the opposition parties going into the next general election, yes, the 5 to 10 year horizon is certainly feasible. The problem is getting that will there. And that's one of the right reasons why we are standing in by-elections, because we want to say to the parties, you know what, you might not be interested in talking about this, but it's the big issue. It's something you need to concentrate on. But I very much fear that if this opposition group go into an election in May 22, even if they win it, then no, we won't be looking at very soon. Because let's be frank. All that's likely to happen in a snap election next May would be that we get a hung parliament with Labour the largest party. We'd have a weak, vacillating government achieving very, very little apart from the completely uncontroversial in 5 years. And let's remember, one thing Tories are good at is regrouping when they're in opposition. So if the Tories are thrown out in 2022, Johnson will be gone. They'll come back with a credible leader, a credible new vision in 2027, and they will sweep away any perceived weak, chaotic government, which is what we will have. And then I think the chance will be kicked into sort of the 15 to 20 year horizon.
Yeah, so yeah, it's quite sobering. Yeah, so it depends on a number of factors. For me, probably something. Yeah, I would agree there with Richard. There needs to be a roadmap. There needs to be some path that, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is the steps we're going to take, and there isn't anything like that at the moment.
No.
There could be some requirements. For me, I think proportional representation needs to be the big change that happens after the next election, because we can't continue in this way, where even if there was a case made for rejoining the European Union, and then at the next election you had Brexiteers back in charge again, they would be like, oh no, we want another referendum to leave. And I don't think Europe would be too happy with that, having, you're in one day and out the next. So I think some major changes have to take place over the next 5 years before we can. Yeah, but I think it's very valid, the point that you raised about having a roadmap. At the moment, there is no roadmap. Okay, let's move on. We have another super chat from, let me see. Whoops. This is from Tonton again. Thank you so much for that. He says, Brits must recognise that their real size is actually their Commonwealth in a close relationship with the rest of Europe, meaning the EU. Kicking out the people from their former colonies won't work. Not sure what if I understand this comment correctly.
I'm not sure I entirely understand that one. Would you mind repeating it?
Sure. Brits must recognise that their real size is actually their Commonwealth in close relationship with the rest of the EU, meaning with the rest of Europe, meaning the EU. Kicking out the people from their own former colonies won't work. So maybe if I'm understanding correctly, Tonton, is that the new Commonwealth is the European Union, is Europe. It's not it's not the former empire.
Mm.
So
yes, I
so
hope
go ahead,
not.
Richard.
No, I was just going to say, obviously, the history of the British Empire is the history of huge, gross injustices which continue to go on unaddressed even today. And if you're intimating things such as the Windrush scandal, and let's be clear, it is a scandal. It's an ongoing scandal. And what there was absolutely despicable. And I hope Britain has learned from that, but sadly, I fear it may not have.
Okay, let's move on to some more questions. We have one from Doug, who says, "Do you think that the EU would accept the UK as a member without electoral reform, the replacement of the UK's first past the post system with PR?" So this is something that I mentioned, or I touched on. Yes, that it would be required. Maybe a requirement of the UK rejoining would be a proportional representation model instead of first past the post. I don't think that would be something explicitly requested from the EU, but I think the path to get there probably would include PR. What do you think?
It's if I take the question exactly at face value, would first past the post be a barrier to actually rejoining the EU? It would be difficult to argue that our electoral system wasn't appropriate for EU membership, as we had the electoral system through the whole 45 odd years of membership that we had previously. But having said that, I think in terms of demonstrating that we're cleaning house, getting our act together, making sure we are more accountable, PR is undoubtedly, it's a moral requirement, isn't it, really? I mean, we can't go on with 100% of the power being from the people that 43% of those who voted and if you think about it, the government won 43% to actually have 100% of the power. The turnout was only about 70%. So what, 70% of 43, about what, 28, 29? And then then the electorate is only about 2/3 of the population anyway, because of the amount of young people. So in terms of the total population, less than 20% of the people in this country gave this government 100% power. We don't have a second chamber that's effective like other countries. The House of Lords can eventually be forced to back down. We have a monarch who has no real power. We've heard in the last few weeks, but it's happened anyway, that the government is trying to neuter the court system to have any way of actually holding it to account. And we're beyond any remit of international legal authorities as well. Some of the threats that Britain made in terms of breaching international law have been quite disturbing, I would say, as well. So I would say we now basically have a rogue government appointed by first past poll, which we wouldn't have if we had proportional representation and at least the internal checks that a parliamentary chamber would have there. So I am very, very, very much in favour of electoral reform. I think the moral case for it is overwhelming. But the specific question, do I think it would be a barrier to us rejoining the EU? I don't think it would.
No, and as you said, we had it before, so they wouldn't. Why would it be a barrier today? Just one question, or just a comment I wanted to make about that as well is, and then a question is, if we look at, for example, the Green Party, how many votes did the Green Party get in the last election? 2 or 3 million, no, or maybe no,
it was a huge amount for. Because I think the statistic is it takes 2 million Green votes to elect one seat. So they've only got one seat.
Yeah, and which I think if you were to apply that in Scotland, for example, if it was applied in Scotland, the Green Party would have a number of MPs, but they are always on one, thanks to first past the post. Just a follow-up question I wanted to ask you, Richard. What's your opinion on the House of Lords? An elected second chamber or unelected, or none whatsoever?
Okay. To answer that question properly, I think we have to look at exactly what happened in 2016 on the referendum. I know I'm bringing it back to Brexit, but bear with me. I firmly believe, and evidence that I've seen since confirms it, Britain was victim to an act of information warfare during that Brexit referendum, perpetrated basically by the Russian government, whether formally or some of their rogue agents. And when you are part of a country that is being attacked by global disinformation sources, not just external, also, of course, we mentioned the Express, the Mail earlier on, a lot of internal sources of fear and misrepresentation. I think you need to think about that very, very carefully when you are designing a legal system, which is why I do think there should be a role for a second elected chamber. I also think there should be a role for a third technocratic chamber. The House of Lords serves neither purpose at the moment. So in my view, in order to be able to preserve democracy within a global environment of information warfare, you need one partisan elected chamber, one non-partisan representative chamber, and one technocratic chamber working in harmony with each other. And that's where the House of Lords falls down. So to summarise, I'm basically suggesting it should be split into all the current people got rid of, half of them elected on a non-partisan basis, half of them technocratic experts representing areas of economic and social importance within our country whose views will hold weight.
That's very interesting. Okay, thank you very much for that. Let's move on to the next question. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but Reagan Elite asks, what are your thoughts on UBI and what does the party think of it?
Well, let's start with the second question. What does the party do? One of the things that we were very careful of when we set up the party, as I said, it's a label that anyone can use to stand. So our party only has two policies, and it will only ever have two policies. Those policies are, number one, we want to rejoin the EU. To be specific about our policy, it says for the UK to rejoin the EU in whole or in parts. We want to try and get back the benefits of EU membership to anyone living in the UK today. And number two, to oppose all forms of bigotry and intolerance. So that is it in terms of the party view. So, for example, I'm going to sit here and tell you how much I think UBI is a fantastic idea and how I think it would be a really, really useful thing to do. You might find another Rejoin EU candidate standing in another election somewhere that says, no, I'm totally against it. So that is one of the consequences of being a two-policy party, essentially. There is no view on anything else. But now let me answer the question. Certainly universal basic income, to me, it would solve so many problems. First of all, we have this hideous, expensive bureaucracy determining whether people get benefits or not. And we spend more on that than we do actually helping people who are in dire need of money. So why not just strip out the whole thing, have a basic livable income that everyone is entitled to? And I think that's a key way to simplify the process and make sure that nobody falls through the cracks. It's ridiculous that some people have to wait months and months on people's sofas or sleeping on streets before they get money. And then, of course, when you lose your address, it's very hard to get benefits. So that's why, I'm a total convert to UBI. I think it would be a really, really sensible thing.
Yeah, I think we're singing from the same hymn sheet. The idea, and also the stigma attached with welfare benefits, which have been, which there should not be a stigma, but there has been one poured into the ears of the public by the right-wing media, for example, for decades. That would be taken away, and then yes, it would resolve so many problems, and a lot of them would be overnight. And I think there's also the center-right argument. I think the idea of giving people money so they can, if they want to start a business or if they want to employ people, if they want to, imagine if you want to start a business, you give somebody this amount of money, they'll always have a level of security that if things don't work out, they can fall back on. And so many, was it 90%? You're a former businessman, you know what I'm talking about. Like 90% of businesses go to the wall in the first year, and a lot of people end up, homeless or in serious financial difficulties because of that.
And a further 9% on top of that survive, but are only ever generating perhaps sometimes less income for more work than you would do if you're in full-time work, and putting people under constant pressure and stress. If I don't carry on doing so, I could be out of my home the next moment. So you're totally right. Max.
Very good. Okay, we have another super chat from DC. Thank you so much, DC. Very kind tonight. This is one that was on my mind as well. Would love to know Richard's thoughts on Scottish independence and if he think it would happen in the next years. And in the next years, not a specific date. So what's your thoughts?
That's a very interesting question, isn't it? And it's quite a sort of interesting moral question as well, really, because clearly in the last elections, there was a majority for a referendum, at least in independence. We know that's where the Greens stood. We know it's where the SNP stood. They had a plurality of votes and seats on that basis. So there is a moral argument for a referendum to go ahead. Now, the UK government will withhold the right for that referendum. That is quite clear. Boris Johnson is not going to let it happen. And of course, Nicola Sturgeon she's in a difficult position because on the one hand, she's been one of the fiercest critics of the government flouting international law, so wants to do things the right way. If there is a hung parliament, I'm pretty sure that there will be a referendum in Scotland for the SNP. Where that referendum is going to go, I honestly don't know. The polls are so up and down on this. I was shown a poll the other day which suggested 55% of people would vote to stay in the Union. And then I was shown another poll the day after suggesting 54% would leave. So I have no idea where that would go. But what I would say is I would respect the rights of the Scottish people to determine their own future. I think every individual deserves the benefits of EU membership. For people in Scotland, if that's the quickest way of getting to EU membership, I would understand why you would do that. And of course, the SNP is one of the few parties that is avowedly pro-EU, that is quite open about wanting to rejoin the EU. And that's, of course, why we won't stand against. We don't need to stand against them in any seats because they're saying exactly what we want to say. on the EU, which is why we won't be standing in Scotland.
And yeah, they're not afraid to use the B word. Yeah, so no, so that's it. That was very interesting to hear from you. Yeah, I wasn't sure your thoughts on that. That's great to hear. Okay, let's move on to the next question. We have a question from Buxton. This is for both of us. What's the best way to combat disinformation about the EU in the media? So that's an interesting point that, Richard, you brought up earlier on about the disinformation back in 2016. From, where we saw it, if you looked into it, it was from Russia, from the United States. How do we combat disinformation about the European Union in particular?
Well, I would say broadcasts like this are definitely one of the steps forward with this. We need to try to make sure that there is more and more open questioning in formats such as this. Now, many channels do a reasonably good job on this. Channel 4 News, of course, is pretty unbiased in what it does. It does always show both sides of the argument, but of course it's drowned out by other voices. The reason I find it difficult to give a satisfactory answer to that is because I'm not sure it's actually possible in the environment we're in at the moment. The same forces as cause government ministers to lie and dissemble when they're giving information also cause the press to do exactly the same thing. Certainly the written media. I have been very, very disappointed by some of the TV media as well. And I've been particularly disappointed by some of the BBC's coverage and the lack of intellectual curiosity to tackle some of these issues. But I'm afraid I don't think there's a magic solution. I think it's going to be smaller organisations, webcasts such as this one, webcasts such as similar ones to this, where people have an agenda of promoting views. And correct me if I'm wrong, Max, on this, because I'm not looking at the screen at the moment, but everyone who submitted a question to this, that question can be seen no matter where it came from. So it's not a case that you can just say, oh, that one's a bit tricky for you, Richard, I'm going to delete that one. It's obvious if there's a question that I don't answer here. And this sort of open questioning format, I think, is very, very useful.
Yeah, I think a problem with generally with politicians is that the media filter the questions for them beforehand, and also the journalists cannot push too hard on it because there's a risk that they won't get the politician back again. And we've seen it with, for example, Piers Morgan, who I don't agree with Piers Morgan on everything, but he's very good at challenging politicians and he's very good at asking difficult questions. And unfortunately, we don't see a lot of that happening unless it's online, because I'm not working for anyone, so I can ask whatever questions I want. Yeah, and for me about this, how the best way to combat disinformation, I agree with Richard 100%. Yeah, we need channels like this. Channels. I started out with this. The way I started out was listening to James O'Brien. You're probably. I'm one of his biggest fans. You're probably a fan of his as well, about the European Union, because he was somebody who was providing something that I couldn't find. I was looking online at the beginning, back in 2016, 2017, about another voice on Brexit, because the only voices I could hear in the media were the likes of Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson, and it was difficult to find somebody who actually disagreed with that. But that has changed a great deal since 2016, thankfully. But it was a problem at the time, and I found James O'Brien, and I ran with that. I'm hoping that James O'Brien will invite you onto his radio show.
I did phone in to talk about Brexit, but due to a misunderstanding, got talking about a very, very different topic. It was a very interesting experience, but yes, that'd be good.
We have a super chat from Timothy. Thank you so much, Timothy. No comment, but that's the support. Let's go ahead. We have another question. I'm going to try and I might filter out some of the questions if they're just repeated ones, because some of them have been repeated from before. Let's see. It's been said that the plurality voting first past the post, that every vote not cast for the runner-up candidate is a vote for the winner. Let's be real here. All you're doing is helping the Tories remain in power. Do you have one succinct argument that can easily be revealed. Sorry, can be easily relayed to a large number of people against such an accusation. So your party is, I think we've already covered it somewhat, but for those who maybe didn't hear it from the beginning, how is your party not just splitting the vote?
And I think that question goes a little bit more for the jugular in terms of its thrust there. I have to say, I do disagree with the premise. I passionately believe that when you go into the voting booth and you cast your vote, that is your personal moral authority. It is your stake in society. It is the way you express your conscience, and it is a duty on a citizen in a democratic society to do that. You will never make a difference to the outcome with your one vote. One vote will never change the outcome. So if you're thinking, oh, well, I know everyone else is going to vote for Party X, so I'm going to vote for Party X too. Good luck to you if you do. You will never change the outcome. And you might say to me, well, how can you say that? It could be one vote that makes the difference. In my lifetime, there has only ever been one circumstance where one vote made a difference. And it's the famous case study of Winchester in 97, where the Lib Dems won by 2 votes. In other words, one Lib Dem voter could have changed their mind to Tory, and they'd have tossed a coin and maybe the Tory would have got in. And do you know what happened in that election? The High Court overturned the result and ran it again because it was too close and there were too many spoiled papers. Because I was always thinking, well, what does happen? I would feel foolish if I said to someone, your one vote will not make a mathematical difference, just a moral difference. But it won't, because almost certainly if one vote determines an outcome in a general election, in a parliamentary seat, it will simply be overturned by the High Court.
That's an interesting, yeah. So we generally have the idea that every vote counts, but that's not obviously not the case.
Sorry to interrupt you there, Matt. I do believe every vote counts. It counts as your personal moral authority in society. And this is why I originally had to run for Mayor of London, just because I could not morally vote for anyone else in the election. There was literally nobody that represented what I stood for. That's why I stood as Rejoin EU in London. So no, please do not hear me saying your vote doesn't count. I think it does count. And I think individuals should be morally, personally accountable for what they vote to. So anytime you vote for a party and that party gets into government, anything predictable that party does, that is your moral authority.
No, very good, very well said.
So no, I think voting is very important.
Let's move on with another question. Do you think that the UK, should it one day seek to rejoin the EU, could ever be in a similar or identical terms to what it was before Brexit? For example, not having to adopt the euro, massive rebate on financial contributions, being one of the leading influences in the European Union. So let's say it comes a day, Richard, you're very happy, celebrating, open some champagne, the UK has rejoined the European Union. What would that look like?
See, the problem is, once again, it's totally impossible to say. Now, we touched on the idea earlier on that new EU members are required to sign up to the euro, required to sign up to Schengen, but all of those requirements can be offset as part of the Article 49 negotiation process, if we chose to. So let's imagine in 6 months' time, Keir Starmer suddenly sees the light, says, oh, you know what, the EU is a great idea. I'm going to lead a government that starts Article 49 and triggers Article 49 and goes into those negotiations and says to all the representatives of the Commission, those initial negotiations, you know what, we made a mistake. How about we just pretend it never happened and go back to the same basis? It is possible that would happen. Human nature means that would be hard. Let's imagine, for example, I don't know, to try and take a similar situation. Let's say, Max, I'd regularly appeared on your programme, and every time I appeared, you'd given me champagne, caviar, a nice dress room, a limousine to take me to and fro. And one day I just said, right, that's it, I'm not appearing on your show anymore, you're a disgrace, I'm moving off. And then I came back shamefaced about a year later saying, you know what, your show was really good. Would you give me the champagne? Would you give me the caviar? Would you give me the car lift to and from the show again? You probably might, but you'd probably make me squirm a bit for it on the way, I'd probably say. That's not a judgment on you as an individual there, Max.
So
That's just human nature. So yes, to summarise, it's possible, but I think it's unlikely we're going to get such a great deal as we had.
Although, yeah, I think also it could happen in stages. So rejoin the single market and the customs union, and then later on. And yeah, I think it's difficult to make predictions from where we're sitting now, and it's difficult to make predictions with a Tory party in power and Boris Johnson in number 10. So, things can change very quickly. You could end up, and it's possible you could end up with a Conservative party that's pro-European. It happened before.
Yes.
It's not impossible. Like Boris Johnson was able to turn a centre-right party into a right-wing party very, very quickly. He kicked all the pro-Europeans out of the party, basically. So I think it is possible. Things happen, and we react to those things. So I think it is difficult to predict the future. No one would have predicted. Well, somebody actually did predict Boris Johnson becoming Prime Minister back in 2011, I think, and they said this is insane. They actually said, "Can you imagine a world where?"
Predicted Donald Trump being president?
Yes.
Sometimes random stupid ideas correspond to reality.
Okay. Buxton had a very similar question, so I'll move on to the next one. Big Maj says, why is there always infighting in the Labour Party, and how much faith do you have in Starmer? So maybe we talked before about Starmer, your faith in Starmer as a leader of rejoining the European Union. What about him as a leader itself? And what about the infighting within the Labour Party? What do you think about that?
I think Keir Starmer tries to be a bridge between the left and the right wing in his party. I think, obviously, Corbyn was very, very much on the left-hand side of the party. Starmer, I don't think. Excuse me. I don't think you'd say Starmer was on the firm right of the Labour Party. I think he was always more in the middle. I think he's ended up in a position where most of the left-wingers have been purged from his sort of top cabinet, and he's kind of almost held hostage by the right wing of the party at the moment. And I suspect Starmer thinks he's going to remain leader after the next election. Whether he loses, expect him to lose anyway. I think the right and the party are plotting for a successor to move the party a little bit on. To go to the other part of the question, though, why is there continual infighting? I first joined the Labour Party in 1992. I didn't really understand it then, and I don't really understand it now, to be quite honest. There are so many people who seem to have so much conviction in one particular principle or another, and people who are broadly in agreement on everything else then seem to become bitter enemies. But yes, one of the nice things I think about PR is when PR finally does come in, then maybe the two halves of the Labour Party can politely go their separate ways. And they might actually find they got on better when they were two distinct parties working together within a coalition where they don't have to pretend that they are all passionately for policies they don't agree with.
No, I agree. And I think a big problem with the Labour, it's not just the Labour Party, parties on the left, is that there are those who want power, and there are those who want power within the party. And I think there's a huge struggle with, there are people who are in the political parties who are not interested in running countries. They're more interested in internal power, and they would actually prefer to lose elections because they can maintain their position. They will, money coming in, a certain amount of influence within the party, especially if the party, is losing, they're able to maintain their position in a sense. If the party's winning, then you have responsibilities, and many people don't like to have responsibilities. And I noticed something which is a bit disappointing for me is, look, I was critical of Jeremy Corbyn when he was leader, but it was mainly about Brexit. I thought his approach to Brexit was completely wrong. But on other issues, the policies, I agree with most of the policies. And the guy himself, I think he's a nice guy. And I've said it on a number of occasions when I was responding to him in videos or whatever. So I like the guy, and I think he's probably a nice guy. But as a leader, he was problematic. And when it came to Brexit, I completely disagreed. I think he went the wrong way. When I look at But I would have wanted him to become prime minister. One of my concerns is with the likes of Novara Media and some of the so-called hard left. I know people don't like that term, but that's the mainstream term for them. Would prefer actually to see the Tories in power than Starmer in power. I don't know if that's true or not, but I get this impression. Owen Jones, for example, he says, no, I prefer to have Keir Starmer in power. But a lot of these people spend more time attacking Starmer than they do attacking the Tories or anyone else. And that's concerning for me, because you need to be, okay, Starmer's the guy in charge, you need to get behind him. I know we're going off Brexit at the moment, but I think this is for something for the Labour Party. Whoever's in charge, you get behind them. And there was a video recently where I responded to, I think it was, I don't remember her name, at the conference where she was interviewed by the media, and she was criticising Keir Starmer at the party conference to the media, a Labour MP.
Diane Abbott or
no, it was another. Well, Diane Abbott has often criticised him as well, but when I saw this, I was thinking, no, you can't do that. Criticize him behind closed doors or whatever, but not to the media, because it just shows that the party is disunited, and then who will take advantage of that? The Tories will.
Yes, that's certainly true. Labour disunity has always been a problem. Well, one thing I would say is, I think it's a little bit more than that. If you disagree with the leader, you have to make your own judgment. You suck it up and stay in the party, or you say, no, this difference is too much for me, to leave the party. Now, I left the Labour Party shortly after Keir Starmer was elected. And that wasn't a judgment on Keir Starmer, it was a judgment on the party going in general. I'll be honest with you, I didn't vote for Keir Starmer to be leader. I didn't vote for Rebecca Long-Bailey, and I certainly didn't vote for Lisa Nandy. I felt none of them said anything to me, so I had to abstain. And to me, that was telling me it was time to leave the Labour Party, because if none of these people were speaking to me, it was wrong for me to be in the party. So I think you're right. If you stay in the party, fantastic, but you suck it up to a certain extent. And even if you find yourself on TV, like the comedy act that we had on Question Time on Thursday, the Conservative minister trying to justify the party. At the end of the day, sometimes you have to say, well, I'm assured that no rules were broken. I mean, obviously, it was sheer comedy gold to actually watch that come out. But that's the embarrassing position that you've got to put yourself in. And you have to think whether or not you still believe in the party's mission statement so solidly that you want to do that. If not, you should walk away.
Yes. Ahmed, thanks so much for that super chat. Thank you, Ahmed. Let's go on. We have I think we'll answer another few questions, Richard, and then I'll let you go for tonight. Let me see. We have Akismad, who says to both of us, with Westminster parties showing no immediate hurry to rejoin the European Union, apart from the SNP and the Greens, how do you suggest trying to get them to throw their hats in behind the motion? Has the attitudes of Brexiteers not caused too much damage? So if the SNP and the Greens want to rejoin, how do we convince the Labour Party and the Lib Dems?
Well, I will take slight issue with the Greens on wanting to rejoin. And indeed, I remember having a debate with a Green actor saying, no, we're in favour of rejoining the EU. It's on our website. And I'm like, oh, okay. And it does say, we want to rejoin the EU customs union, and only the customs union. That is their stated policy. And that, of course, is why we'd like the Green Party to go a bit further. Now, let's remember, with the Green Party, they've got a new leadership team, only just been elected. I'm not sure what direction they're going to take the party in at the moment. I'm excited to hear what their views are on rejoining the EU, because, of course, if the Green Party, as I say, I used to be a member of the Green Party. I love the people in the Green Party, the most genuine people you will come across within a political movement. Now, the Green Party know that if they are going to achieve their aims of trying to address climate change at a global level, it has to be with international cooperation. And the EU was a very powerful force in terms of trying to drive action against climate change, which we should unite against. I'd like to see the Greens taking up that particular mantle and going forward. But I've taken issue with the question. I haven't answered the question. The question was, how do we try to persuade others to sort of pick up their mantle? That's one of the things that I do think we serve a bit of a purpose of as the Rejoin EU party. So other people can do pressure in different ways. People write to their MPs, people write to their parties, people join parties like the Lib Dems in order to try and make a statement. What we do is in by-elections, we try to hold the Lib Dems' feet to the fire. So we are very annoying if you are a Liberal Democrat in a by-election, because we are constantly asking you about your position on the EU. And Cheshire and Amersham was a lovely example where I encountered hundreds, literally hundreds of Lib Dem campaigners down there who basically fell into two groups. Some of them would talk to me, and you could see that they were so frustrated because they believed everything I was saying. They wanted their party to say exactly the same, and they were really annoyed that I was the person on the street talking about rejoining the EU, and they weren't. Those are the people we have to give courage to. These are the people that we have to say, you're right, make your party advance in them. And let's be fair, let's give credit where credit's due. Lib Dem party policy is starting to move forward. They just had to caveat their last policy by saying, we won't campaign against Brexit or rejoining the EU, which obviously means they're not going to mention it in elections. There's also the other half of the party who will toe the party line. They don't think too deeply about it. They just say, yeah, we were in favour of the EU. Now we're not in favour of campaigning for it. It's a long-term policy. I won't think any deeper than that. But I think that point you said, Max, about the nastiness of the debate, people are just exhausted, I think. It was such a horrible time during the Brexit debate from 2016 to 2019. A lot of people just can't face doing it again, even though it's the morally correct action for the country to take.
About the Lib Dems, I think it's a good idea to empower or to encourage those within the party. And maybe at the moment the Lib Dems maybe don't see Europe as a goal, but they see as unseating the Tories as a goal. And we've seen a number of maybe you can disagree with me on that, but I think maybe some of them see as the blue wall in the south of England as an opportunity for them, not so much, maybe not at the moment, the European Union.
I think we have to ask ourselves, though, what would they do if they were successful? Now, 2010 is a long time ago, but when people voted Lib Dem in 2010, they did not expect the Lib Dems to support a Conservative government after that point. And that was a very, very nasty shock. Now, let's be frank, those were nicer Conservatives in 2010, slightly more decent people that they joined with, but they still brought in austerity and things Lib Dem voters wouldn't want to happen. Now, you might say, oh, that's in the past, that's never going to happen again. Well, let's look at what happened in the London Assembly elections this year. To put it in a nutshell, Labour got 11 seats, the Tories got 9 seats, and the Lib Dems and Greens between them, 5 seats. Now, I'm not going to defend Labour's behaviour because they were behaving a little bit childish, but the Lib Dems and the Greens could have used their votes to either give Labour control of all the committees or give the Conservatives control of most of the committees. They chose to side with the Conservatives again in 2021. And the reason I find that a particularly bitter pill was because although I stood for mayor and I stood in the General Assembly, we didn't stand any candidates in the constituency. So I had to make a judgment going into the polling booth in the constituency which of these parties I would vote for. And I spent a long time agonising between the Lib Dems and the Greens in that election. In the end, I gave my vote to the Greens because I felt the customs union was at least something tangible they were doing. The fact that they then sided with the Conservatives to put them in charge of committees across London disgusted me, quite frankly, and really shocked me. As someone who voted Green, I did not expect my vote to contribute to that particular action. And this is something, and you might say, oh, you're just spreading poison as you politicians do. What I would urge people to do is talk to your Green candidates, talk to your Lib Dem candidates, ask them what they would do in a situation of a hung parliament. And if you want to get the Tories out, you have to get a understanding from the candidate you're electing that they will actually get the Tories out in the event of a hung parliament. They won't side with them to keep them in office.
Yeah, so you don't want another case of another hung parliament and the Lib Dems jumping into bed with the Tories once again. Although I don't see that happening, but it's possible.
Well, again, I would have thought it was impossible. I would say 2010 obviously was a historic example. The fact they did it in London in 2021 with the current Conservative Party led by the current person who is in charge of it, that's what really appalled me.
We have an interesting question here from Buxton, who says, have you encountered, I think you've sort of touched on this earlier, Richard, have you encountered many Tory Rejoin supporters? How do they feel about the current government, and would they vote for another party if it meant rejoining?
This goes back to some of the... I described it as a low state of political mental health in our country, and I do stand by that. I'm thinking of one person I did speak to in a recent election. Very, very nice young guy, member of the Conservative Party, helping the Conservative candidate, told me how gutted he was that we left the EU, really, really wants to be back in the EU, but still supports the Conservative candidate under these circumstances. And so, yes, there are a number of Conservative pro-Europeans. For example, our candidate in Cheshire, Brendan Donnelly, used to be a Conservative MEP who now stood for us because, of course, obviously Europe is his big issue, and he believes the Conservative Party is so wrong. And there's a whole spectrum of rejoin Conservatives between the two, between those who will actually step out of the party and vote for someone different, and those who will stay in the party. And this is something that I can never get my head around. If there is a policy that I am absolutely against, why would I ever vote for a party that's in favour of that just because I think later on they might change their mind? It's crazy, and it doesn't make sense within a democratic framework to do that.
Yes. We have a super chat from Number 3. Thanks so much, Number 3. I'll be going to Maastricht in February for the Winter Festival there. I don't know if that's on this time, but I'm going anyway. It's a lovely place. Maybe we could all meet there. Wow, would you like to meet? We could all meet up in Maastricht next February. There are some restrictions at the moment, so I don't know if it's possible. But I was hoping to visit London in December, but it's a bit difficult at the moment. So
I have to admit, I've given up making plans more than a few weeks in advance.
Thanks so much for that, Number 3. We have another question from Conservator, who says, do you think EU member states would want to see a major change in public opinion on the EU or in the EU if the UK were to consider if they were to consider the accession of the UK, and then would it be possible for the UK? Let me reread this question. Do you think EU member states would want to see a major change in public opinion in the EU if the UK and in the UK before they would consider the accession of the UK? And is that even possible with the UK right-wing media press? The right-wing press.
Well, two very good questions there. The latter part of the question, I have to say, and I don't know if this is a typical demographic, but younger people seem to be more immune to media manipulation than older people that I speak to, because they're used to going to new media. And as that filters through our society, I hope it means that the extreme right-wing press and their programming of the population will have less and less effect. Would Europe like to see a more positive attitude from the UK before rejoining? I think they probably would, but I mean, there's certain things we can't do. Whether we like it or not, Nigel Farage will always be a UK citizen. He's that embarrassing uncle we can never get rid of. So there's always going to be characters like him. We just have to hopefully persuade the EU that once again he's been put back in his corner.
Very good. So we've come to the end of the stream for tonight. I want to say a massive thank you to Richard for coming on from Rejoin EU. Remember to check out the website, subscribe to the YouTube channel, Richard's YouTube channel, like and subscribe, of course. And he's putting out some very interesting interviews and videos, so do check that out. During the stream tonight, we had a bot which was posting the link, so remember, everyone, you should be able to find that. Cahill, we have a late super chat from Cahill who says, thank you both. February isn't in winter. Okay, so it was not my fault. It was the original super chat. Okay, so the best of luck in the future, Richard. We're going to be watching you, and then we can meet up again sometime soon again. See how things are going. I'm going to watch North Shropshire quite closely, and
oh, it's going to be fun, North Shropshire.
Do you predict a bloody nose for the Tories?
I'll be frank with you. I think the Lib Dems will win, and I think the Lib Dems will win with a 4-figure majority in North Shropshire, based on everything I've seen so far, based on what I've heard. I've not spent much time in North Shropshire, but I have talked to a few people at the beginning of the campaign in North Shropshire. So I think yes, but I think they're already in damage limitation mode. They could not have gone quicker on this by-election. In fact, the timetable was greatly accelerated because the result being on December the 17th means it's going to be lost in the Christmas nonsense.
Yes.
Bloody nose on Boris Johnson. So I think the very timing itself reflects what was expected there. But sadly, I think although the Lib Dems will win, I think it will have no long-term impact.
Okay.
That's my prediction.
Well, we'll watch this space. So thanks once again, Richard. Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone who came on tonight. Thank you for all your super chats. And I'll see you all next time at the same bat time, same bat channel. Take care. Talk to you soon. Good night, guys.
Thank you so much, Max.